Welcome back to Curiosity Killed the Cat podcast. My name is Marcel Fedovo, an engineering student at RMIT University. Today I'm joined with Francis Lillis, an accounting student at Swinburne University. Today we'll be talking about Australian and American politics, podcasting, and current affairs. Before we start, make sure you are following the podcast on Spotify. And let's get right into it. And also how you went into podcasting. So first, I know that you're very interested in politics.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. Start now.
Okay.
Go.
All right. So basically, I think my interest for politics started probably around 2020 during COVID time. So, a lot of the viewers, the millions of people that are listening to this podcast currently, I know a lot of people were probably during 2020, we were all locked inside. We were all, stuck to our screens, I guess, sometimes, and, listening to, the premiers, prime ministers across the world talking about COVID updates, that sort of thing. So during that 2020 period, I think for myself, I really, really, really started to, I guess, engage more in politics and, start to understand what's really happening in our society and really, what steps and what things are politicians doing during this specific time.
Specifically in Australia or around the world?
I think it started in Australia, but from then on, I've, I guess, kind of tried to gain as much political knowledge as possible all across the world. So I think just because as well 2020 was the year of the presidential election, so I did kind of get into that sort of presidential swing. But I think specifically probably Australia I focused a lot on. And it wasn't always necessarily just the policies. I think in general, I was really, really into, even though it sounds very nerdy, the whole political, how a political party can gain majority parliament, how many seats, the percentage of swings and that sort of thing. So that also really, really pushed my interest. But that's really how I started 2020 COVID times. And from then on, I think if you remember, Marcel, we had a Year 9 humanities project. It was do you remember it? Do you remember what it was? Or
I don't know what specific.
It was the one at the end of the year when we had to do create our own project.
Yeah.
I forgot the name of it, the actual name of the project.
Was it online? An online one?
Oh no, it was when we were back.
Okay.
In class. So what we did was, so me and George at the time, we were working together on the project, and I was in the full political swing. So I was really, really interested, in politics and that sort of thing and policies, especially around COVID. So we based our project, and this kind of does relate to how we started the podcast a bit. We based our project a lot on, politicians during the COVID-19 pandemic and, how their decisions affected, the greater community, especially in Australia, and especially elderly people, and how they protected them from the dangers of the virus. And at that point, we created a set of questions that we wanted to do. There was about 10. So, what are your thoughts on the federal government's handling state government? What could they have done better? What was the media representation? Those sort of questions. Yeah. And we emailed a lot of politicians at the time. So this is the first time I started to try and interact with them.
Yeah. What did you think you were going to get a response from them or?
At that point, no.
Yeah.
I did not think I was going to get any response at all. But after we got we did get some replies back, not as many as you'd think, because I think we did start it a bit late. We only gave them 2-3 weeks notice. And with politicians especially, the higher up you go, the least likely you're going to get a response.
Yeah.
Busier, that sort of thing. Yeah. Today I got I've been trying to work out some more interviews for the podcast, which we'll talk about later. Yeah. And I got a response from the Shadow Treasurer in Victoria, and he's busy till probably, I think he said June, July.
Oh, so wow. Yeah, okay.
It's really, really busy for them. But we got some replies from some crossbench MPs, if I remember correctly. It's about nearly 4 years back, but I don't know if you know Fiona Patton, who used to be a state MP. There was also Clifford Hayes, and then there was some Liberal and Labor MPs in state politics that also did reply. Not many came back with responses just because of the short notice. But yeah, that was really the first opportunity I had of interacting with politicians at that point. Yeah.
Okay. So, well, I do want to talk about specifically the Australian politics because I haven't learnt I don't know anything about Australian politics.
Okay.
And also, I wanted to talk about podcasting.
Yeah.
Because I'm just getting into it, and
I mean, your quality is probably better than ours.
Yeah, but it's the content that matters.
That is true.
So,
yeah.
And that's what you have.
Mm-hmm.
So, you told me just now that how you got into podcasting, kind of, and how you got into contacting these politicians. Mm-hmm. So, can you tell me a bit about? Actually, let's talk about COVID since we were on that topic. What do you think specifically about how COVID in Australia was handled?
That's a good question. Very,
because
very good.
You're like in the political kind of sphere. So,
if we think about it now, at the moment in time, the Liberal Party, especially here, was really, really, adamant on, the strictness of the measures that were placed in during that time. I think if we look back at it now, those measures probably were required compared to, other countries, especially. We did keep the virus at a low point, but I think for the amount of damage that it caused towards businesses, especially in, the city and, a lot of, businesses all across the nation, especially even, I know you wanted to say more towards Australia, but across the world, like the damage it caused was really, really bad. And, the inflation that we've got currently and, the economic problems we've got currently all relate back to 2020.
Yeah.
So if we look back at it now, I think even the measures that were taking place at that current moment, without the foresight of what was going to happen in the future, were adequate. But if we look back at it now and, if we had our time back, I think a lot of politicians wouldn't have, especially in Australia and probably even New Zealand, which were two very strict countries. I think if they look back at it now, the strictness might have been a bit too far, in my opinion.
Okay. What do you think about how easy it was for the government? I don't want to get into conspiracies, but to take away our freedoms, to put us in our homes and tell us that we can't leave. I don't know if that's something that you have opinions on, but
I mean, at the time, it was a once in a generational pandemic, and at the time, you're thinking, since it was, if we're looking back at it now, as I said, with foresight, it was an unknown virus, and we didn't know what at that stage it would cause. So global those sort of measures at that time are important, and those sort of whether it be a lockdown, I think at that point in time was adequate. But if we look back at it now and we see how COVID's treated currently, I guess it was a bit far-fetched and a bit too extreme in that extent with the lockdowns. I think, there were some measures that were good, face masks at that time were really, really important and those sort of things, and social distancing. But locking down businesses and locking down Australians for, especially in Victoria, was nearly, I don't remember the exact number of days, but it was about 260 days in the span of 2 years.
Jesus.
It was too far-fetched, I guess. And, the economic pressures and where we are currently is in the state, as in, how much debt we have, do relate back to what happened in 2020 and 2021, which is pretty sad to think about.
Okay. And now that we now that we've experienced this, what do you think should have been done instead of what did happen? So the masks you said were a good thing.
I think with masks and social distancing were important. I think what could have been done better was, it's a good question. If I can relate a little bit off the topic, I think one of the other good things we did take out of it was working from home. which is a really, really good thing that we've taken out of it. Because before, people were coming in and out.
Even now, there's people still. There's like people. Even my mum, for example, she works part of the week at on site and part of the week at home.
Yeah, and that would never been discovered without COVID.
Yeah.
But I think if we look back at it now, probably, especially in Victoria, the lockdowns were a tad too strenuous, and I think they were too long. For instance, in 2021, when the whole world was opening up and we were starting to get back to normal, and that constant in and out of lockdown. I remember in 2021, I think term 2 or term 3 in our school year, there was 1 week we're in school, next week in lockdown, we're back at school again, lockdown again. And, that sort of change in environment is very, very detrimental and can damage a lot of people's, not only their schooling and their work-life balance, but, just that constant change in society and that constant change in, your work environments and where you are is really, really damaging. I think those sort of effects are still, I guess, sadly, are still seen today. And those effects from lockdowns, the whole well-being effects, mental health going downwards, downward slope. It's all, I guess, related back to what happened during COVID.
Did you hear about the silence pandemic? It was during COVID. It's because everybody was put in their house. There was this wave of sadness or depression. Did you hear about that?
Oh, yeah. So, people were just stuck on their phones, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, there were definitely big negative effects of this. Also positives, working from home. But yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say about
COVID?
Yeah.
I think what we can take out of it though is, governments, still have a lot of power, and I think before COVID, people didn't realize necessarily how much power the government did have.
Yeah.
Before, lockdowns happened and that sort of thing.
Who was our prime minister during COVID?
Scott Morrison.
Didn't he hide some things, or did he give himself extra power?
Yeah. So what Scott Morrison did during COVID, it did come out after the federal election in 2022. Was basically he sworn himself into ministerial roles. So I think Minister for Health, Minister for he was the treasurer, Minister for Resources, and some other portfolios.
Did he keep that?
Yeah, and he kept it a secret from
his
ministers. So I think that was very detrimental to Scott Morrison's prime ministership.
Yeah. Is that an indication of corruption?
I wouldn't say corruption in the sense that, he wasn't taking funds in that sort of thing. But I guess it kind of does show a little bit of obsessive power.
Greed, for power.
Yeah, that sort of thing. And a bit of a control freak in a sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard about, and to all the listeners out there, there was a documentary that came out about a month or two ago called Nemesis, which focused a lot on the Liberal government for the past decade, so from 2013 to 2022, and it focused on the 3 prime ministers the Liberals had, so Tony Abbott, Malcolm Turnbull, and Scott Morrison, and each of their prime ministerships. So it was a 3-part episode. It was televised on the ABC. So it was 3-part episodes, and they're focused mainly on each of their prime ministerships. So I think in general, what a lot of people got out of that was, they did talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Scott Morrison, sworning himself into those sort of portfolios. And I think something that you didn't realize necessarily was when I watched it, there were a lot of backbenchers in the Liberal Party that were pretty annoyed and even some of the ministers that when they found out that Scott Morrison was sworn into those portfolios without their knowledge, they were pretty annoyed because, of course, you're a minister of the government. You have that responsibility, and for the prime minister to sworn himself in and to become a minister or a treasurer in that sense, kind of does show that he has a lack of trust in you.
I guess, the opposing party would have used that against him.
It didn't come out till after the election. That was the thing.
Right. Okay.
So
Albanese got elected.
Yeah. So Albanese
before that
before it happened. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it wasn't necessarily used
Yeah.
as an election winning thing. It probably would have won in the election.
Yeah.
But yeah, it wasn't out until about, I think, May, because the election was in May, but probably June. And there was a whole press conference and that sort of thing around it. Yeah.
Do you know anything about how other countries handled it, or
COVID especially?
Yeah, COVID specifically.
I can talk a little bit about, in the US especially, there were some states that just never locked down. So, for example, the governor of South Dakota. So, I don't know, you've heard of South Dakota in pretty remote, pretty Republican sort of state. So, the governor there, Kristi Noem, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing her name wrong. She's actually talked about as being a Republican vice presidential candidate to Trump currently. But yeah, there was no lockdowns, no mask mandates. And I think in general, I don't know the exact statistics in South Dakota with
COVID
cases and that sort of thing. But I think it probably did have a detrimental effect. In the US, healthcare is not free. So a lot of people would have died unknowingly. But I guess it's a small state, sort of, if I did have the statistics on me to take out from COVID in general. But
I can search it up.
Yeah, you could probably search it up and check it out.
Yeah.
I don't know I don't know the exact numbers of how it was handled there.
So the statistics of COVID in
South Dakota, like how many cases, deaths, that sort of thing.
COVID-19 overview, South Dakota. 3,000 deaths and 300,000 cases.
I need to double check that.
And I don't know what their population is.
It's very small. So 800,000, 900,000. So
their population.
That's pretty high, honestly.
So that's a third almost
of the country
who got cases.
Yeah. So I think in that sense, that's sort of, what that kind of proves to me is that, there were some necessities with, masks, social distancing, that sort of thing to stop the spread of cases. But I think in South Dakota especially, the businesses kept going and the economy didn't fall as much. So I think if we do look back at it now, you have to find that fine line between protecting people, but also making sure that the economy is still running at a strong pace.
Of course. Yeah. But I guess the health of people are priority, but you can't only think about your physical health. You need to think about the mental health and everything. So I guess being a politician is a very difficult job. But yeah, can we talk about how the political system in Australia works? Because that's something that I don't know a lot about.
And I'm guessing a lot of young people don't know how the political system works.
And it's very important to know for people who are going to vote soon.
Exactly.
So what are the two major parties in Australia? We can start off with that.
Yeah. So in Australia, very similar to the US and the UK, it's a two-party system. So there's the Labor Party, ALP, and the Liberal Party. And Liberals all are in a coalition with the Nationals, which is a rural-based political party. So basically, Liberals mainly focus on... So the Liberals are a political party that is driven by, free enterprise, freedom of speech, that sort of thing. And they believe that every individual has the right to, make a living and succeed in life. And
okay, so on like social media and stuff, I get more content about United States politics. So to compare the Liberal Party with the American parties, it would be the Democratic Party or the
That's
Republican.
Very interesting that you brought that up. Yeah. So in my opinion, a lot of people out there will say the Liberals are Republicans and the Labor Party is Democrats. Mm-hmm. But in my opinion, the Democrats represent the Labor Party and half of the Liberal Party. And the Republicans represent the other half. So Not to get too political, each party has factions. So within the broad scheme of a party, there are factions. So in the Labour Party, there is the Labour left and the Labour right. So the Labour left is very, very...
Okay. Wait, so factions are other parties?
Oh, no, so...
Okay.
okay.
What are they? Okay.
Yeah, so basically, so a faction is a group of people within a political party who have their own viewpoints and own
Wow, okay.
ideologies within the party. So
and
party...
they get voted in?
Not...
Or,
it's a bit complicated to explain this. So
okay, yeah.
in the Labour Party, especially in when they go to elections and that sort of thing, each member of the party, so if you go all the way back down to the branch members, so not the people who are elected to parliament, but the people who vote, who are like the branch members, like the junior members of the party. So they vote in who they want as their candidate for a seat a seat or electorate.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, in the specific area where they're from, it depends on how many branch members you have from a certain faction. That will determine who the candidate will be. So, for example, what's a good example of this? In a seat like our seat here in Gellibrand. Yep. So, I think this is in Gellibrand, and there's two seats in Gellibrand and Laylaw in federal politics. The federal member here is Tim Watts, who is a member of the Labour right. So back in the branch, so back in, the local area, so Point Cook, what else is in this seat? Footscray, Williamstown, that whole area. In branch meetings there, they will vote on who they want as their candidate. And I would assume, I don't know the numbers, of course, but I would assume the Labour right has a majority of branch members here compared to the Labour left. So that's how Tim Watts gets elected. And sometimes, the party can overwrite, the Labour Party especially can overwrite who they want as a candidate. So, for example, they'll say, we want a Labour left candidate in this electorate, we want a Labour right candidate in this electorate, and so on. And that sometimes happens in the Labour Party, unfortunately. But most of the time it's down to the branch members. And it's very similar in the Liberal Party in a sense as well.
Yeah, okay. So I guess you're getting into more specifics now. But I think we should maybe take a step back and maybe not talk about the party specifically.
Yeah.
But talk about how the system works. It's a democratic system. How does it work compared to other systems like the United States or...
So our house, we have two houses of government federally. I'll focus on federal politics because that's probably easier to explain than state.
Yeah, very foundational.
Yeah, very, very foundational. Yeah. So in federal politics, we have two houses of government, so the Senate and the House of Representatives. I'll start with the Senate first. So the Senate basically here is very similar to the Senate you have in the US, so it's copied from the US. So in the Senate here, all of the 6 states, so Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia, and Tasmania, all have equal representation on how many senators they elect. So they have 10 senators. So it's a bit unfair in a sense because, New South Wales' population is a lot bigger than Tasmania, but they still have the same amount of senators. But it just gives equal representation to each state. So in total, in the Senate, we have, I believe, 64, and I forgot to say as well, the territories, so Northern Territory and ACT, they both had 2 senators.
Okay.
So there's 64 in total. And then the House of Reps that we have in Australia is very similar to the House of Commons in the UK or the House of Reps in the US. So basically how it works is, we have the census, and that determines the population. It indicates the population of each state. And on that population from the census, the Electoral Commission determines how many electorates are in each state, depending on the census and population changes. So, for example, currently in federal parliament, I believe they're taking away a Victorian seat because our population declined over COVID, and they're adding a seat in Western Australia. I don't know. I haven't checked in a while, but That's what's happening. So
Okay.
each state has a different number of House of Reps seats or electorates. But yeah, so each electorate is based on an area. Sometimes areas can overlap. So, for example, in Gellibrand, where we are, and Laylaw, Gellibrand covers a lot of inner western Melbourne, inner southwestern Melbourne to Point Cook. And then Laylaw covers the rest of the southwestern suburbs. So basically electorates try to reflect a given area. And, you know, sometimes electorates can't be perfect. So there'll be areas, for example, that are a lot more conservative leaning, and there'll be some areas which are a lot more liberal or progressive leaning, and they're in the same electorate. So it sometimes doesn't reflect the entire population of that area, but it's the best system we have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So also to mention, we are kind of a monarch, but
Yeah.
because we have the king.
Yes.
I just have a question. In India, they became independent, so that they don't have that. All right. But they have a similar political structure.
So in India, actually, it's a bit different. So with India,
I don't want to get into too much.
Yeah. So basically, we have the Governor General in Australia who represents the king here, and it's a very ceremonial role. So, for example, they don't have rights, or they don't basically govern over Australia. That's the Prime Minister's job. So the Governor General is basically there to represent the king and be very ceremonial and sworn in a ministry or a minister that gets elected, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's different again to, if I can compare it to the example of India or the US, where their president is so Narendra Modi, for example, he's the Prime Minister of India, and they've got a president which is also a ceremonial role. But in the US, for example, Joe Biden, they've got a system of 3-tier government. So they have the states, the federal government, so the House of Reps and the Senate, and then the president, which is basically the big figure who governs over the whole country.
Yeah.
And the equivalent of the president here would be the Governor General if the Governor General had more power and had the authority to govern. But we copy, I guess, India in that sense, that the Governor General and the President are basically similar, but, with India being a republic and we still being part of the monarch, different names and that sort of thing. And India's president is just representing being like the, how do I put it? Ceremonial sort of figure, going to those sort of things, representing India, but they don't have any political power in a sense. Like they can't govern, but it's very similar to the Governor General here as well.
Do you think that we'll keep this kind of that we'll stay in this monarchy, or do you think it will just keep it for like a ceremonial purposes, or we'll let it go?
That's funny that you bring that up. So I actually watched the video yesterday, I believe. So one of the former prime ministers, Malcolm Turnbull, a Liberal prime minister, he used to be in charge of the Republican movement back in 1999 when we have the Republican vote. And the Labor government's talked a lot about having a Republican referendum again after the next election. So we could be voting on whether we want a republic or whether we want to stay in the monarchy in under 3 years.
So what difference does that make if we become a republic?
It depends on the system they elect. But if we do copy India's system where their president is ceremonial, it could mean the president is then nominated by the House of Reps. So in that sense, each party will nominate someone to become president, and then they'll vote in the House of Representatives. And basically, whoever gets the highest number of votes in the House of Reps becomes president.
Yeah.
And there is another system they could use where the people actually vote on the president, the ceremonial, on that ceremonial role, which was actually a very big point in 1999 when they had the Republican referendum, because a lot of people voted against it because they were against the model that they introduced, which was they just wanted the president to be voted on in the House of Reps by politicians, not by the people. And that actually changed a lot of people to vote against becoming a republic. So I think it didn't pass by, it was 61 for, 39 against, something like that. But if they changed then maybe had the president be democratically elected, it could have been a different thing, and we might be in a republic nowadays.
Wow. Okay. Also, just to go back to the foundations of the system, so the House of Representatives,
Yes.
it's where the ministers are.
So the House of Representatives is where the Prime Minister is. So basically, the leader of the major party that's got the majority, that's got the majority number of members, is the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And the ministers can come from either the Senate or the House of Representatives. So, for example, the current foreign minister, Penny Wong, she is a senator from South Australia, and she is she's the leader of the government in the Senate, which is a whole different thing, which I don't think is too important. But yeah, she's from the Senate, so you don't have to necessarily be from the House of Representatives to be a minister in that sense.
Oh, okay.
So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is just going back to basics, things that we learned in high school.
yeah,
To pass a bill, somebody in the House of Representatives, can anyone just bring up a bill, say that, oh, this could be a good idea?
Yeah.
And then it goes through the process of the House of Representatives? And then the Senate, and then wait. So how does the voting system work for bills?
So basically, a member can bring up a bill in any time in Parliament. So during they'll bring the bill up in Parliament basically, and then what will happen is it will go through a long strenuous process. So, for example, I was in Parliament last Thursday, and they were debating a bill on. This is Victorian State Parliament. They were debating a bill on forwarding our climate plans and our climate goals from 2045 to 2035. And that bill was brought up, I think, earlier this year. So basically, the energy minister at the time, Lily D'Ambrosio, she brought it up in the House of...
Yeah, I went to... Sorry, to cut you off, but
Yeah.
I saw her the other day. I went to this the opening of Omexom Institute, and
she was there.
Yeah, she was there. Yeah, but yeah, go.
Yeah. So yeah, she brought up the bill in the House of in the Victorian Legislative Assembly, which is basically the House of Reps, but in Victoria. Okay. And then at that point, it goes to committee, and then they will normally, since in Victoria, the Labor Party has a huge majority in the Legislative Assembly, so the House of Reps, for any of those, just to simplify it. So it passes through there. And then the reason why the Senate exists, or the Victorian Legislative Council, it's basically there to veto and to review the bill. So most of the time, in most circumstances, the only circumstance I can remember is in WA, which is where the majority party has a majority in the Senate, or in the upper house. It's normally known as. So just to go back there, the House of Reps or the Assembly is known as the lower house, and the Senate or the Legislative Council is known as the upper house. So
Okay.
I don't know why. I think it's mainly related to probably something in the UK where the House of Commons is in the lower portion of the building, and the House of Lords in the upper portion. So it's probably related to that. But in most circumstances, the governing party or coalition won't have a majority in the upper house, so the Senate Legislative Council. So what that's going to mean is they can't pass it through just with their own political party, so they have to get the support of the crossbench or even the opposition in a circumstance. So what that allows for is the committee to look through it, and for political parties to raise concerns and to raise adjournments against the bill, and to change some of the structure around it. So the Senate basically and the upper house, what it's known for is to be the House of Review. So it reviews all the bills and since it represents a more broader spectrum of the whole society, because it's got a lot of minor parties, it gives a different perspective, and it allows for bills to be adequately, checked off, and and to make sure that the bill is right for purpose and will do its job when it's passed through law. Yeah.
Okay. Another kind of question. It's off topic, kind of. It's still about politics.
Yeah.
Do you have any opinions on, for example, communism, or like compared to democracy? No, communism is. You compare communism with democracy, right? Those are two different political.
Yeah. So you've got communism, or
right?
you've got you've got right wing. You got fascism. So it's fascism, communism,
right,
or
the horseshoe.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Do you have any opinions on that? Also, I wanted to talk about Singapore, because they have also like an authoritarian, specific kind of
government there.
Governments, right?
Yeah. So me personally, I take the viewpoint that I'm completely against authoritarian governments in a lot of circumstances. So,
okay. Do you think it gives a country an advantage to have an authoritarian government compared to other countries that have to change?
The thing it does, in a sense, that it allows for the government to do whatever they want, basically, and to,
for example, in China,
they,
or Russia even,
to an extent, they can basically, in Russia's case, start a war, and no one's really too opposed. And only small opposition figures who don't have much power, sadly. It does, I guess, it does remove that whole level of, as I said with the Senate, review, that sort of thing, and amendments to be drawn, that sort of stuff, and other voices to be heard. So it does allow government specifically to do things how they want, and in the small case that an authoritarian government is good, it removes that level, those time lags and that sort of thing of actually putting legislation into place. The problem is with authoritarian governments is that it doesn't necessarily represent the whole of a society, because when you think about it, everyone's very different in political views. There's, probably people listening to this, some people probably have pretty far left views, some people probably have pretty far right views, or somewhere in the middle. And if you have one government, in charge forever, basically, which is what they have in China, which is what they have in North Korea, Cuba, Vietnam, some other authoritarian countries that I haven't named. It doesn't
Afghanistan,
Afghanistan, as well. It doesn't represent the entire population, and that's the whole role of government. You're representing the whole entire population, and you're trying to, in a sense, improve the lives of the people. That's why you're elected. And if you don't have opposition figures or people from opposing viewpoints, you're not going to entirely represent the whole population. And there's eventually going to be people who are going to be oppressed, and people who are going to be disadvantaged compared to other groups.
I do have this analogy, however. I'm not a professional in psychology, but there's this experiment where someone was given the option between around 30 jelly beans. They picked a jelly bean, they ate it, and they were asked if they liked their choice. Then there was another group where they were given just a selection of 2 jelly beans, and then they took one, and then were also again asked if they
Like their group,
liked their jelly bean or whatever. And the group with more jelly beans to pick from were less satisfied than the group who had only 2 to choose from. And I don't know if that applies to politics, because, for example, an authoritarian kind of system, you don't choose your government. You don't have the choice at all. And then in democracy, it creates kind of groups, two groups, opposing parties, For example, in the United States, there's like a really big line like between you're Democratic or you're Republican. I'm not trying to like advocate for authoritarianism.
I get what you're trying
I'm
to
just
say.
trying to like put out some arguments. What do you think about that?
From what I'm taking from that analogy, what I guess it shows is that when people aren't given many options, in a sense, with the government, they of course just have to, follow into line and just take whatever they have.
And
so
they don't have a choice. They can't really argue.
Yeah,
they'll be punished.
So when you got 2 options on a jelly bean, you just take whatever option you think is best. And if you've got 1 option for a jelly bean and you like jelly beans, of course you're going to take the jelly bean.
And you'd be like, thanks.
Yeah. So in a sense, I think people born in those repressive countries, sadly, they don't have a lot of outside media influence. Will be they'll just know it as it is, and they won't really question the fact that there's only one government in charge, and since they were probably born into it and probably lived in it their whole lives, they won't really question it and they won't really do anything about it because they've never seen anything different from what they've seen before.
I've seen like I would hate to live in China.
Yeah.
Have you seen they have facial recognition cameras?
Oh yeah, I've seen those online. Yeah.
And they like if you jaywalk or something, you get like lowered social credits or something.
The whole social credit.
Is that real? Or
I haven't done much investigation into that. I do know from what I've done with research into China. I do know their government is very, very repressive. Especially
it seems so dystopian. Just thinking about that.
The government has basically full control of the country.
Yeah.
I wouldn't doubt it in a sense that China does have those sort of things. I haven't fact checked it, so I can't confirm or deny. But from my opinion, I wouldn't doubt that they have those sort of things running in around cities and that sort of thing.
They even have it in the United States. I know that there was like this period of in this area. I don't know the exact facts. If you want to know more, do your own research.
Exactly.
But there was a city where there was so much shoplifting that the shop owners just didn't like do anything about it. They didn't care anymore. There was just so much. It was normal. Mm-hmm. So they now have facial recognition cameras in front of stores and things like that to allow access or something. If you stole something before, then you can't enter or something.
Oh, okay.
And that seems like the start of some kind of dystopian world.
I get from that circumstance and that sort of issue, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, when you're trying to protect people and you're trying to, if you've taken something, of course, or stolen something from a store, with that facial recognition, if the police aren't doing their job and catching these people, sometimes, investing in technology like that can help protect your business. Like, any business that's under threat from, shoplifters, that sort of thing, will try and protect their business as much as possible, and we'll come up with ways to figure that out. But I do get what you mean, that encroachment, because, what are they going to do with your facial recognition? They're going to use it. And I do get your concern with that. But I guess you have to find that fine line in between, I guess using AI and technology and that sort of thing to protect people, but also making sure that a lot of people's details and, facial recognition and, whatever, passports, credit card details, that sort of thing are protected in that sense.
Yeah. Okay. Because, it just seems like some kind of, they're taking away some of your freedom.
That's true.
I think it was Ireland or one country wanted to have only digital currency.
Oh,
so you couldn't have physical cash anymore. Yeah, which means that the government can control what you are allowed to buy. They have that possibility, which is kind of what could happen in China. I don't know if it's real or not, but if you have like very low social credit who jaywalked too many times. You can't buy a candy bar anymore. But yeah,
it's crazy in that sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else to say about I don't know, politics or what's happening in the world right now with
I mean,
things?
what's in the new? We could talk about. Do you want to talk about the 2024 presidential election? I know that's on a lot of people's minds.
Okay.
So last week we had, I don't know if you listened to it, we did have the State of the Union address, which is basically when the president talks in front of Congress, so all of the members of their House of Reps and their Senate, and, talks about, what, they're planning to do in 2024, and basically just addresses the whole of the nation.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you talked a little bit about this I did watch Chahil's episode.
Yeah.
And you did talk a little bit about Joe Biden and, the dementia, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
From my personal viewpoint, I think what the media does and what social media does is it can take a small clip from a person's speech, from a person's, media output, or from what someone says in an interview.
Yeah.
And it can distort it and, change what it represents. So, for example, another example, so Rishi Sunak, who's the UK Prime Minister, he went to, I think he visited some hardware store or like a manufacturing place. And he was, I think he was building, I don't know exactly what he was building, he's building a cupboard or something like that. And, he's using a hammer, of course. And then the media tells him to start hammering with the hammerhead facing sideways like this. And of course, they take that video out of context and it explodes on social media. Yeah. And it basically shows that
he doesn't know how to use a hammer.
He doesn't know how to use a hammer. And, he's some sort of, dweeb. He doesn't understand, how the real world works, and he lives in his own little bubble or something. And that wasn't necessarily true, because the media, reporters told him to hammer like that, and someone told him at the site to hammer like when he actually knows how to use a hammer. And nobody actually saw the rest of the part of the video. Only people saw a 20-second clip of him doing like that, him doing that. So, in a sense, I do get like people, don't have as much time to, listen to and watch a whole interview, and a 20-second, 30-second clip is more attractive to watch, and it may give them a broader attention spans, and that sort of thing, shortening. But it doesn't necessarily show the exact politician. So, for example, what people, I guess, know about Joe Biden is, dementia, old, doesn't know what he's doing, that sort of thing. And
but from the videos, I know,
from those videos,
of course, you're telling me they're taking things out of context, but even like, I don't know, it just seems like even out of in context, that would seem like a really goofy. Like I don't know.
I mean, of course, I'm not going to deny he's old. He's 81 years old.
He's going to have some.
He's going to have some problems.
Problems, yeah.
But if you watched his State of the Union address, I know it's an hour and 10 minutes.
Okay.
It was very, very powerful, and it was a really, really good speech. Joe Biden, in a sense, he's a very moderate Democrat, so he's not a very left-wing Democrat, and in that case, he can really connect a lot with some Republican voters, in a sense, and he doesn't. For example, there was a lot of jokes he threw in his State of the Union speech. So, like, for example, at the start of the speech, he was like, before he started everything, he said, "If I was smart, I would go home now." And then, for example, he was making fun of Republicans for not backing his border security law that he was trying to bring through Congress, and he was like, oh. So like he brought it up. He's like, Democrats brought forward their border security law, and then he was talking about what it was going to do, and then the Republicans in the Congress started booing him, and then he was playing with them a little bit, and he was like, oh, you don't like that bill, huh? The conservatives backed, and then he was kind of playing with them a little bit, and I think Joe Biden gets this sort of, I guess, hallmark, and he's placed into this certain category where, you know, he's very, very, you know, people think he's stupid, people think he's old and he doesn't know what he's doing. But some of that time it's taken out of context, you know.
Yeah.
He's not a perfect politician, of course, but, you know, the media puts, of course the media is trying to get as many likes as possible, and, you know, that sort of content.
And all media is biased.
Yeah.
There's no unbiased. I don't know if there's any like truly unbiased media. Everybody has an opinion.
That's true.
So-
Yeah. Everyone has even, you know, government run media, which is supposed to be unbiased.
Yeah.
There's people on there that are, you know,
Their own
political views. Yeah.
Political views might show, and
Yeah. Everyone has their own political views, and everyone has their own outlooks on the political sphere. So people will have their own bias. And what I guess a lot of, you know, I don't want to put blame on a certain group, but a lot of what right-wing to far-right-wing media do in the US, for example, is they focus a lot on what Joe Biden does, like, for example, falling off a bike, falling down the stairs of Air Force One, talking about chocolate chip ice cream.
Entertaining.
And it's entertaining because it gets clicks and it gets that sort of viewpoints. But when that's the only thing people know about Joe Biden, it gives a false premise and a false sense of what he actually is and what he's actually doing. And, you know, there's a lot of people out there who probably don't like him, especially because of what's happening in Israel, Palestine, I guess what's happening in their economy, that sort of thing. But when you look at, in my personal opinion, when you look at the two candidates there, you know, you've got Joe Biden, who is not perfect. He's old, a bit slow in some senses. But when I compare him to Donald Trump, who I will say here, pretty narcissistic, pretty, you know, he's said it before that when he gets in office, first 24 hours, he's going to be a dictator. So there are some things with Donald Trump that, you know, I can support, you know, but there are a lot of the things that he talks about are, I guess, in a sense, pretty extreme and pretty out there. So
Okay. Yeah. I guess it's good to be on the outskirts and watch it as
it's entertaining to watch. It's entertaining to watch.
Show.
So everyone out there, when the debates come out, make sure to watch the debates, which will probably go for an hour to an hour 30. That's probably going to be the funniest thing you'll see this whole year, just watching Donald Trump and Joe Biden go at each other.
So this is also very important for the Americans who are going to vote. What are the tips to have an unbiased view of the politics at the moment? Because all media is going to have some kind of bias, some kind of they're going to try and push their own ideologies and things like that. So what is your kind of tips to get it unbiased?
I think the best tip that I can give is just try and diversify your media and try and get things from different sources and find, I guess, the source that you think is best for you. So, I mean, for me, for example, in Australia, you know, sometimes I'll read a Guardian article, which is a very left-wing article. Okay. And then next moment I'm reading something from Sky News, which is pretty right-wing. So I like to diversify my viewpoint, what I read, and try and figure out what I think is correct in my own opinion. And I think in general, what I guess Americans should try and do is try and diversify what you read and what sort of media you're into. Because if you suck yourself into one point of view, it's like, I can talk about, a good example of this is probably the Israel-Palestine conflict. I don't want to get too political. But, you know, a lot of young people are very, very pro-Palestine. And, you know, they will watch social media and they'll get this certain viewpoint and, you know, they'll, you know, be like, oh, and of course, I'm not going to deny, you know, the loss of life in Gaza is disturbing, and it's really, really sad to see a lot of people dying all across, you know, Rafah, Gaza City, Khan Yunis, all those places. Khan Yunis. But what people need to realize, they need to always take both sides of the opinion and don't just necessarily focus on, you know, the side that you agree with. And I'll quote someone here. So I was having this conversation with Akshita last year. Okay. And what she told me was, it was a really, really good thing that I've kept in my mind and I've always thought about.
I'm going to tell her to listen to this.
Yeah, tell her to listen to this. So what she said to me last year was, what social media does is that it repetitively shows the thing that you want to see over and over again.
Exactly, yeah.
And with so many young people just watching social media constantly, or watching Instagram Reels, TikTok, and, you know, if they have a very pro-Israeli stance or a very pro-Palestine stance. They will never, in a sense, get to understand and get to hear other people's viewpoints and other people's views, like of the opposing side. So they'll be so determined and so focused on one view that they don't understand the other side of the coin and what other people think. And when that happens, we lose debate and we lose, conversations, because when someone is so adamant on their views and just doesn't want to listen to anything anyone else says, what's going to happen? They're not going to be talking, and your society is going to be more divided. And that's what's happening in the US. Republicans, there are some Republicans who are so obsessed with Donald Trump and the sort of theories that he brings up, and there's some Democrats out there which are so left wing and so into their theories around gender and that sort of stuff that they just don't interact anymore, and then you're losing debate. And what debate does, it brings democracy together. And
I don't think we have debates anymore.
Yeah,
really.
That's the whole problem. People just don't talk anymore, and people just don't talk about their viewpoints anymore. We don't have free debate. And what that does, it just destroys democracy, because people aren't hearing other people's viewpoints. And when you hear someone else's viewpoint, it challenges on what you think. And
it's the whole point of democracy.
Yeah, it's the whole point of democracy, basically, hearing other people's views and coming to a compromise and a better solution for society. And I think that's something that we are losing, sadly, with social media. A lot of young people just aren't into, listening to other people's viewpoints, which aren't necessarily, on their stream of media or their stream of politics. And it's reflecting a bit on how we are changing as a society, and how, people are so stuck in their own bubbles and stuck in, they just want to surround themselves with people that, have the same viewpoints as them. And it's making people lose debate, as I said, and, lose that sort of democracy, which is really terrible to see.
Yeah. It's what I practice as well. Like, I try to practice, like, you'd want someone to try and prove you wrong. Because if you have an argument and they have a rebuttal that you can't defend your own argument, that shows that there's something wrong.
Yeah.
You can't just say, no, you're wrong. You have to have a defense, like be able to defend your argument. If you can't, then you need to rethink and build upon, and everybody can that way come to a consensus. And that's
a compromise in that sense.
That's not what happens
anymore, sadly, which is terrible to see. And I think in general that's what social media has done, and different sources of media. One great quote that I cannot remember who said it, but one great quote I heard one time was, back in the day, people used to argue about the same set of news, and nowadays people are arguing on a different set of news, because there's so many different sorts of media, and on a topic,
and false news and
false news and that sort of fake news, and
fake news.
That's massive across the world. I can talk, if you want me to, I can talk about specifically one country where fake news played a huge role. So I'm half Filipino, if some of you may not know, and in the Philippines in 2022, in the 2022 election, we elected the son of the dictator who we ousted in 1986 in the People Power Revolution. And what happened there was, it wasn't that, I wouldn't say Filipinos were stupid and they just elected him
another dictator.
Yeah, they just elected the dictator again.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying what happened was, the young generation there don't know about what happened with President Ferdinand Marcos. I'm talking about the current president, Bongbong Marcos, who was actually here a week ago in Melbourne for the Asian Summit.
Okay.
But yeah, so I'm not saying Filipinos are stupid, young Filipinos, especially young Filipinos. I'm not Filipinos. I'm not saying they're stupid. What I'm saying is the spread of falsehood and, fake news on social media at that point was so strong. So people were talking about, I don't know if you know this, but Ferdinand Marcos Sr., with his government, was it held a Guinness World Record for the most money stolen from the people. It was $10 billion US dollars.
What?
Yeah, he stole $10 billion US dollars.
How did he do that? Like from taxes or?
Basically, they just so during the Philippines in the 1970s, during the Vietnam War, a lot of the main barracks and bases, so outside of the US, were in the Philippines because of the Vietnam War and the US's presence there. And there was a lot of money getting pumped in to the Philippines. So what Marcos was doing, he was spending a lot of infrastructure projects, but a lot of the funding that he was getting from the US, he was taking for himself. And it wasn't being accredited for and recorded in terms of government spending. And, they bought a lot of houses all across the Philippines.
Wow.
Imelda Marcos, his wife, is world famous for having 1,000 shoes. All these designer bags, clothes, everything.
Wow. Okay.
And the whole population at that point, when we got into the 80s and late 70s, even my mum, a lot of people were living in poverty. And there were about, I think, a statistic that was shown was 1 in 3 Filipinos didn't have enough food and were living in poverty at that point. And
did they wear those designer clothes in public? Like for them to be shown on the news?
Actually, what happened was, so when they did the revolution and they took over the Marcoses in 1986, people stormed the palace and the mansion.
Okay.
And what people did was they went in and they went into where Imelda had all her bags and shoes and they started taking them.
Wow.
And then that's where everyone actually saw how much stuff she had.
Oh my God.
So there's museums in the Philippines just full of all her bags and all her shoes that she's got. And she's still alive to this day, actually.
Okay.
Bongbong Marcos's mum, the wife of Ferdinand Marcos. She's still alive. She's 90 years old now. But so what, if I go back to fake news and what basically happened is a lot of, I guess, in the Philippines, Facebook is massive. It's huge. It's like about 90 million people on Facebook there, and there's 110 million people. So everyone's on Facebook.
Wow.
And what Facebook didn't do was it wasn't vetting on what was true or not with terms of media. And, there was all these conspiracy theories brought up. And I do like to talk a little bit about Leni Robredo, who was the main opposition candidate. And there was a lot of things brought up against her. For example, like they were saying, her daughter's a whore. She was having, in the Philippines, a very conservative society. Like she was having sex outside of marriage, that sort of thing.
Yeah, which is against the social
social norms and that sort of thing. Yeah. And they were talking about how when Bongbong Marcos, when his father was in government and when his father was president, they were talking about how the country was doing so well. There was so much infrastructure projects, that sort of thing, and all of the human rights violations that they had. They killed a lot of opposition candidates. Like I don't know if it's a pretty famous assassination, but the main opposition leader there, Benignoy Aquino, who actually is from my home province in the Philippines, where my mum's from. He was exiled in the Philippines in the 1980s, and when he came back, he took a flight back to face the charges and against him. When he stepped off the plane, he was assassinated at the airport.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Jesus.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. And, all these falsehoods that were spread, people talk about how Aquino was a communist and how he, was working with the communist rebellions and that sort of thing, and how Marcos was just trying to defend the people, and all these conspiracy theories that were brought up about each of the opposition, the opposition candidates to Ferdinand Marcos and the current opposition candidates to his son, Bongbong Marcos. All those conspiracy theories, I guess, flooded Filipinos' Facebook and, their YouTube, that sort of thing, those social media. And what it did was, it changed how history was written, because there's now a new generation of Filipinos who don't know what happened and don't believe that those things happened. And what it did was it allowed for the son of the dictator to be elected in 2022. So, and that's now, I guess, happening in the US. Same thing, there's a lot of, I guess, lies that are being spoken of, and it's a really big problem now because as I said before with that quote, back in the day we used to argue about the same set of news, and now we're arguing about a different set of news. And what social media has done is that it can just change what history is, and it can change what people think about what happened in the past, and it can change people's perspective and that sort of thing. And, it's making people question now what is real and what is fake.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I think the best sort of democracy is when everyone knows the truth, but they argue about what should be done. For example, what would be a good example of this? In the US, I've seen videos of some conspiracy theorists talking about how the people going in across the border are paid actors who are US federal agents who are showing there's a border crisis. And
I think that's real.
But I didn't realize you were part of that group. Marcel.
Yeah.
There's people who believe that, and then they get so stuck into these theories and conspiracy points that they start to question what is real and what is fake. And I also, if we go talk a little bit about conspiracy theories, I know we're getting a little bit all over the place.
Well, I like conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Entertaining.
I don't know if there's a psychological thing around this. So I don't know the exact terminology around it, but when you hear, what I've read is when you hear that, there's some news or, a viewpoint or a view that you believe to be true, and that the rest of society doesn't know, it sends an indication to your brain, and you want to discover more about what is you believe to be true and the truth. So what it does is it makes you so obsessed with these theories and conspiracy theories that you just question what is real and what is fake, and you start to believe that everything you see around you, the government, everything is fake.
And then I guess you more easily dismiss arguments against what you're searching for because you're so invested in it.
So I guess I don't know the exact psychological terminology, but there is a lot of psychology around that, and I guess that might be something for our viewers or even for us to research but a bit more. But there is a psychological thing around conspiracy theories and, trying to discover when you discover something that you think to be true and the whole world doesn't know that, you just become so obsessed with trying to figure out, and listen to more theories that you believe to be true. And it sends some stimulus.
I think the Earth is flat, I've been doing so much research on that. But okay. Something that does scare me, if we go back to the topic of misinformation, is AI. Do you know a lot about AI or?
I know a little bit.
Okay,
a little bit, not as much as probably Rajiv does.
Yeah, of course.
or Chahil, but I can talk a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've seen Sora, the video creator, and there's also the voice generator that copies voices, and
I love watching those.
Stolen money already with that kind of thing. That scares me. Like, how are you meant to know that anything online is real?
Yeah.
In the next maybe 2 to 3 years, we won't know if anything online is real.
Yeah.
So this also is implicated in politics.
Yeah.
Because people will use AI to convince others that that party that's not the party.
Yeah.
He has dementia.
Yeah.
Or he's So what do you have any thoughts about that?
I think what with AI use in general, I think I think we have to start to regulate it, in my opinion. I think we can't continue on the path we're going with AI, people talk about, AI and robots taking over the whole world.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to get to that case. Probably not. But yeah, I think in general, especially, as you said, politicians and parties using AI to distort what's true and not is a really big issue. And I think we can't let ourselves get to that stage where we start to use AI for a political advantage.
Well, we kind of have that, like what you said, what you quoted with what Akshita said.
Yeah.
The algorithms.
Yeah, the algorithm.
Are feeding you biased stories, things that you want to see, things that are specific to one party. So it's already here, and it's only going to get worse, I think.
Yeah, and I think we have to find a way that, I know it's going to be very hard, but I think what we have to try and do with social media companies is, they have to find a way to, vet and try and, remove that sort of fake news content on social media, because it just distorts people's brains. And
is it possible? Is it our own responsibility to get off social media, or to be even more critical than we normally are?
Because the problem is, and what, I don't like to quote him too much because I don't really agree with a lot of his views. But what Bernie Sanders one time said on an interview was he said that it's not the American people's fault that, they believe these sort of conspiracy theories, like, the Trump supporters believe those conspiracy theories. The problem is when you're so desperate and, you see from your point of view in society, like, let's put a hypothetical situation, like, your wife's broken up with you, you're losing your house, you're in such a chaotic situation, so desperate, and what you see is the government's not doing anything to support you.
Yeah.
You get attracted to these sort of, I don't know, if you know the term, these sort of populist sort of ideas.
No.
So populism is for those out there who don't know what populism is, it's basically a political term which is used to try and appeal to, the working class or the average sort of voter. And what populism does is it basically, in a sense, creates simple solutions to extensive and hard problems. So, for example, a good example of populism is building a border wall. It's a simple solution to fix an immigration crisis.
Yeah.
But is that going to really stop immigrants from coming in?
No.
Illegal immigrants? No,
really.
Because people are going to find other ways to come in.
Yeah.
And it's a simple solution to a complex problem. And when people are so desperate and when people are so, disenfranchised with the government, in a sense, because sometimes the government, sadly, doesn't always govern for all people. It can't govern for everyone because, everyone has different views. And when people get so disenfranchised with the government, they just get attracted to these sort of populist ideas and these sort of, anti-government viewpoints, anti-establishment viewpoints, is what Donald Trump pushes. And, he likes to say, I'm from a business background. I'm not a career politician. These sort of things, I can come from your mindset. I haven't been stuck in Congress for 56 years like Joe Biden has. What it can do is these sort of populist ideas, it attracts people because, they want to hear, most people want to hear simple solutions to problems they face,
Yeah.
With immigration crisis, like I said, building a border wall, it's a very simple solution. Just build the wall and it will solve the issue and it's going to cause it. That's what some people believe, but it's not. And I guess when people are so desperate, they like to hear that, people, politicians are out, that there's some politician out there that's attracted to them and trying to help them. And when they hear these sort of simple solutions, it's very attractive because it allows them to think that, there can be solutions to these problems, but in reality, those sort of simple solutions just aren't the way to go and aren't necessarily going to fix problems.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so we've been going for a while. Do you want to change up the topic and we can talk about podcasting?
Yeah, we can talk about podcasting on.
Yeah.
I think.
So we can relax a bit.
Yeah,
we've been going pretty
intensely. Pretty intense.
I grabbed the water.
All good. So do you normally just like cut it up and like with your editing? Like how do you normally do it, Marso? Is it just like?
What I normally do, I try to do the least amount of cutting as possible.
Okay.
Because I like to keep it raw.
Okay.
And also I want to I want to keep it as simple as possible because I'm just starting. I want to get the consistency down first. Because if I like, imagine I'm very, very motivated to start at the start, and I do all these podcasts and I do all this editing, and then I have something in my life that takes more time out of my life, and then I lose motivation for this, and then I just stop it completely. So I'm trying to make it as simple as possible.
Yeah.
Just record, keep it natural. If it's a bad podcast, then
hopefully this hasn't been a bad one.
No, of course not. But it doesn't really matter for me right now. I just wanted to get on the road, and then
that's fair.
Started.
Yeah.
So tell me about. Tell me, how's your podcasting going?
Yeah. It's been really good so far. So, as hopefully some of you may know, it's not myself, it's me, George, and Tobias. We are doing a podcast. So we're doing
the Donkey Vote.
The Donkey Vote podcast. Great name, I know.
On Spotify. Search it up.
Search up Spotify, YouTube, We're on 42 subscribers, so hoping to reach 50 in the next couple of days.
Awesome.
Yeah, so basically, our podcasting's been really good so far. I wouldn't say we're as adequately, high tech as Marceau.
You have video.
We have video, so we're not all listening. I might try and just make it all
Audio.
Just all audio. Yeah.
It makes it easier, I think.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Do you upload a video file to Spotify?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think for Spotify, what we could do is we might start moving towards audio. And with our with our YouTube stuff, it's going to be a lot more visual based. Because I do like the visual sort of podcasting setting, because it does show people that there's a face behind the name.
Yeah.
Especially with politicians, because they are. Some people think they're very distorted, out of this world sort of human beings. And putting a face on a name is good. But yeah. We might move towards video, audio, maybe with Spotify. I think we can probably do that, especially because we record via Zoom a lot of the time, that sort of thing. And I know when you're recording Zoom, they record the audio, and it's probably something we can also do when we do our in-person interviews and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So how does that work with Zoom? So you do some episodes on Zoom.
Yes.
And you do some episodes in person.
Yeah.
Is it how difficult is it to get an in-person interview?
It's not too difficult, honestly. Okay. I don't want to talk about the legalities of Parliament and how you get in.
Yeah.
I mean, I could a little bit, but so basically how in-person interviews work, you have to to go to Parliament House, for example, you have to get invited by a politician. Like you can't just show up and just be like,
What's
hey,
up,
I want to come in. And you have to get, ID checked and have a parliamentary sticker and that sort of thing, and to go in. But yeah, we do like to do the in-person interviews because we actually get to meet the politicians we're interviewing.
Yep.
And, we get to see them in their environment. And, with just trying to do the interviews in person, it is a bit complex because we can only come in for a couple of days. And, when they're in Parliament, it's only 3 days every fortnight. So it's a bit hard to find the time. And, doing interviews online is a lot easier. It's like today, for example, we did an interview with Evan Mulholland, who is the deputy leader of the Liberal Party in the lower house in Victoria. Upper house, sorry. And yeah, we did that online on Zoom because they're not sitting in Parliament today. And he did offer us to come to his office, but his office is all the way in Greenvale.
Okay.
And I mean, it's about 30-40 minute drive, but if we take the train, you got to go into the city, then you got to go up to Upfield. And Tobias and George are both at uni today, so it wasn't practical enough to go in. So Zoom is a good option, I guess, for, long distance sort of interviews, because, we don't necessarily always interview politicians from Victoria. Sometimes it's interstate, and that's not, I guess,
Okay, so yeah, that's kind of something that I was thinking about. I do want to. Right now, I'm doing episodes with friends, with the people I know, But I do want to try and get some people who are like not professionals necessarily in their field, but
Do you have any ideas of who you want to get?
you
don't wanna
yes,
say.
Yeah, I don't want to say, but is it? I don't know if it would be very hard to get people. I don't know. Like your experience, you email them,
Yeah.
and then you're able to get a Zoom call.
Yeah.
Um,
So, because basically what we did was, we put it as, when we started sending out the invitations, we wanted to put it as a sort of like project that our friends are doing. Because a lot of the time, a lot of politicians especially, you won't probably have this much problem with, professionals, but politicians are very scared of the media because,
right. Yeah.
because they, they think that, we're trying to like ruin their careers and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So you need to put what we try to do. We try to put it in like a very like low grade perspective of just like year 12 students, university students. And after a while, when you do a couple interviews, the politicians talk to each other. And one thing actually I didn't say before when we were talking about politics, if I can quickly say that Tobias actually messaged me to say on the podcast, on your podcast here, Amaso, is the fact that a lot of the politicians in general, you may not think it, but a lot of politicians from, the Liberal Party in Australia, the Labor Party, even in the US, the Republicans and the Democrats, they all talk to each other and they interact with each other, and you never think they do. So
because they're the opposing parties, they have different ideas.
But they still talk to each other. And, for example, in Victorian state politics, one of the interviews we did was with Renee Heath and Joe McCracken. And they're very good friends with a Labor MP called Michael Galea, who we also interviewed. And he's I don't necessarily agree with all the things that, his party puts forward in like their policies, but he's a great guy.
Okay.
And, sometimes in politics, it's not, and in general with people, it's not always, you stay with your political lines. Sometimes some of your best friends are from different viewpoints and have different perspectives on life.
You need to immerse yourself in other viewpoints.
Exactly, as we said before, for greater democracy. So, as I said before, that's something Tobias wanted me to bring up.
Okay.
But yeah, with podcasting, if we go back to that topic, so after a while when we did the interviews, when we started to get a bit more well-known in the political landscape, in the political community, it was a lot easier to get those interviews because, we were able to show them our previous episodes and those previous interviews. And, they were able to gauge and say, oh, these guys aren't too bad. Their questions aren't as political as you'd expect and those sort of things.
I guess I can work my way up. And also it won't be like, I won't be getting politicians. Probably not.
I mean, if you want to.
I might. Yes, correct.
So after a while, when you do a lot of interviews like that and you start, the hardest thing for us is probably the first interview because we didn't do it before. And I remember when we interviewed our first politician, Neil Angus, I have a lot of respect for him because he jumped on the podcast and we'd never done an interview before, like never ever. And I remember the moment before we started, I was so scared because I'd never talked to a
Is this because I saw on your YouTube channel, your first episode was like 3 years ago?
Yes, this is the first episode.
Was that one? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, with that one. And we're a lot younger back in the day, 3-4 years ago.
I mean, to me, it's crazy to think that like you were in year 10 or
year 9.
Year 9.
Year 9 going to year 10.
To start a podcast with politicians, like talking to politicians who, I don't know, that just seems, I could have never done that.
I think looking back at it now, it is pretty crazy that we did that.
Yeah.
And, I just looking back and I think, as a lot of people have said, a lot of politicians have said to us, and probably a lot of people, close to us have said, these sort of memories that we've created from the podcast, and I hope you can do the same with yours, Marso. They last a lifetime. Like, looking back at it like 30 years from now, we'll be probably talking about this interview that we had.
And, with the next generation of podcasters.
Yeah, so, exactly. And yes, I think what it really pushes, what I hope with the world is that, people are very, they push for innovation and, creating new ideas and starting things up. Because before us, like I know there was no other year 10s that wanted to start their own podcast and do this sort of thing. And, with you, Marcel, but there's probably not many other, first year university students who want to start their own podcast talking about those sort of ideas. But yeah, I think it's really important that, if you're passionate about something and you really want to do something, go out there and do it. There's no one in the world that's going to stop you.
Yeah.
And there's no one you may think there's people in the world that's going to stop you, but, who really cares about them? It's your own life and, you're free to do whatever you want. So if you want to start a podcast, if you want to, go for that job, go for it because, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah. And my philosophy is you should just start. Don't worry about making it perfect at the start. Just start. And then like for me, I know my podcast is not perfect, but I'm not looking at my podcast as it is now. I'm looking at it as it's going to be in the future. I'm hoping that I'll just keep the consistency going and then continue to improve even in myself. And plus, this is good for me to learn and to network and to speak with friends. So, yeah.
It's a great way of networking. As I've gotten and George and Tobias have from politicians,
Yeah. So
we
you guys are very well set up to
move forward in life. If we want to get a job with the government.
Yeah.
Also,
you know everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, okay. So if we go back to podcasting, so I think it might be easier for me to do video calls with people, unless I'm willing to bring this setup to different locations, or because this is like not really like if I was in the city, it would be probably easier to get people to come.
Yeah. And I mean, carrying this whole setup around and just setting it up somewhere in the city.
Maybe it could fit in like a very specific kind of bag.
Yeah.
But
it's a bit.
Yeah. It's doable.
It's doable, but like if you're talking to someone from like Sydney.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Yeah. Yeah. But I'm thinking of getting people who are in the fields of philosophy and religion. I was listening to a podcast today and yesterday of Diana Walsh.
Oh, okay.
She was on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Oh.
I don't want to get I wouldn't be able to get her, but
you never know. You never know.
Well, yeah, one day. But it's so interesting. It's mind blowing, these kind of philosophies, and I really enjoy the study of religion. But people like that, people within the energy sector, because that's the kind of field that I'm going into in university. Actually, what are you doing right now? Are you in uni?
Yeah, so I'm currently going to Swinburne and I'm doing a Bachelor of Accounting, majoring in accounting and financial planning.
Yeah, I remember that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, going down that path, I know it's pretty boring, but not as interesting as Marceau's. You're doing
engineering.
Engineering.
Yes, electrical engineering.
Electrical.
I will major one day.
Yeah, not as interesting as that, but well, there needs to be accountants in the world. So
exactly. Actually, what accountants? What do they do exactly?
So it depends what type of accountant you want to be.
Okay.
So, for example, you could do tax accounting. So you're focusing on tax and that sort of thing, and doing people's tax. People doing people's tax.
Are you scared of AI taking that over?
I think what I've heard is AI was going to take over the bookkeeping side of, writing up checks, that sort of thing, because AI can't provide advice. It's not as, it doesn't have that human touch, of talking yet. It doesn't have that yet. And, I guess with AI, what people have said, it's going to take over the bookkeeping and, that simple jobs of just, working in like a little small company and doing that sort of thing. It would be easier for a small company to do that. But, if you work for a big accounting firm and you're, for example, doing auditing, like you're auditing a business, you're going to need people to actually be there and to...
So there's still use for humans.
There is still use for humans,
far.
Hopefully. If it doesn't happen, I'm going to lobby the government to make sure AI doesn't get that far advanced.
So, okay. My dad has just arrived.
Yeah.
So if you want, we can end it now. It's been exactly an hour and 30 minutes.
Okay. That's, I guess that's...
Unless you want have anything else to say, to talk about.
Yeah, I don't really have anything on my mind that we want to talk about, but it was a pleasure coming on the podcast, Marso. Hopefully,
thank you for coming.
Yeah, no problem. Hopefully, you guys can continue, and I know you wanted to do it for a whole year. I listened to the Chihuahua episode.
Well, we'll see.
So we'll see.
I'm trying to upload like bi-weekly.
Okay. Yeah. So
every fortnight.
Yeah. So hopefully we can. Hopefully you can try and continue the podcast and keep it going. And if you want to come on the Donkey Vote podcast, more than welcome to.
I'm a very trusted politician.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Marso.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Look out for new ones coming soon. The coming episodes are really interesting. Some great ways to support this podcast is by checking the social media accounts on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Another way is by clicking on the links in the description. There are some books there that would interest you if you liked this episode. And if you know someone or you'd like to come onto this podcast, email podcast.cktc@gmail.com. Thank you and have a good day.